So I want to thank everybody for coming tonight. We're really excited to have our second Success with Conifers session, starring Ted Hildebrandt from Cold Water Springs Nursery. Cold Water Pond, sorry. Springs Pond. It's all wet, right?
It's all water. Yeah. It's all water under the bridge.
And Ethan Johnson from Holden Arboretum. Did I get that one right?
Correct.
All right, I'm on a roll. And Bob Fincham, I think everybody knows Bob Fincham, but former owner of Conesium Gardens and conifer expert extraordinaire. So our first question came last month after our meeting. Someone was asking if they have a potted conifer or potting soil, can they somehow sterilize it and reuse it and add amendments to it? I said it probably wasn't a good idea, but what do you guys think? We'll start with Bob.
Well, depends on how long the potting soil has been used. If it's been used more than 2 years, then it's too compact, and it probably should just go on a out in the garden, make it part of the garden soil. I would not reuse it in a container. If it's only been used for 1 year, then it could probably be mixed with some fresh and reused. I don't think it has to be sterilized. In fact, I'm not sure how you do that.
That seems like sterilization is something that we don't want. We don't want the sterile mix. I mean, people have gone to great lengths to add, compost or, even composted sewage sludge. I know at Klein nurseries, they use the recommendation from research that was done at the Ohio State University, and you want those organisms in there.
Right. What do you think, Ted?
Yeah, I concur with Bob's statement there. Here in our nursery, if like we pot something up and it's for some reason I don't know, maybe make a mistake or something like that, and we're unpotting it within a year, sometimes we'll reuse the media. But if it's longer than that, then it goes into the compost pile or out on a garden or something.
Well, we build up a lot of salt if you fertilize your plants in containers a lot, and that can cause its own problems if you try to reuse it, right?
For sure.
So thank you. I'm going to share screen here for a second. Somebody sent me a picture of, I'm sorry, I forgot the name of the conifer. I don't even know if they told me or not. But it has some funky white fuzzy stuff on the inside, and they were wondering what it might be and if they needed to treat for it.
Pinus sylvestris, Scott's pine, the cultivar of that.
Yes.
It was Moseri, wasn't it, Jeff?
I think it was.
Yeah.
Now that you mentioned that, sorry.
That's common on Moseri. It's just the pine sap, the resin. Nothing harmful.
Yeah, we see it on Moseri, globosa viridis, a little bit on green penguin.
It's just catching some dust.
They're extra resinous around the base of their needles there.
Yeah, it's just nothing to worry about.
Cool. Good tips there. Okay, I'm going to take that down. So we also have a lot of questions on soil in general. A lot of us have heavy clay soils that we try to grow conifers in. I know if you have too heavy a clay soil, you end up making sort of a bathtub situation. So those of us with heavy clay soils, what do you think we should amend it with? Or should we just try to make raised beds? If you can't make raised beds, what should we amend it with? We'll start from the right this time. Go ahead, Ted.
I sometimes have pretty good luck using pine bark that's oftentimes sold as a soil conditioner, and that kind of breaks things up a bit. But really, the raised bed is the best because it's just so hard to make a modified hole in as you said, a bathtub. And that just seems to always lead to more trouble than a raised bed is.
Cool. What's your experience, Ethan?
Yeah, we have heavy soil and so plants that require decent drainage, like in a rhododendron garden. Long ago, or
And rhododendron garden horticulturist found that he just created new beds on top of the soil. He didn't dig in the soil at all because we tried every single mix possible, but it created a bathtub effect. So either the soil was too wet or too dry, too wet in the winter, too dry in the summer. So, I mean, if you're trying to grow plants that require better drainage than your soil will offer, the raised bed is the way to go. And you know, that's what we found. And if you know, if you can't do that, you're just going to have to limit yourself to arborvitae and other conifers that can grow in that heavy soil that's seasonally wet.
There's a lot of nice arborvitaes now, though.
Yeah, there are.
What do you think, Bob? You've lived in some interesting places.
Well, even though I was lucky, I was in Glacial Till, which was about 40% gravel. But when we did the Snozium Rock Garden up in South Seattle, that area, about a half acre, you could almost make bricks out of the soil. The clay was that thick in it. And so what we did was we broke it up, we subsoiled, and then we built about a 2-foot berm on top of it using pit run, which is a mixture of sand and gravel. And then over that, we put a foot of topsoil, and that's what we planted in. One of the key things was to have transition zones when you go from one type of soil to another. If you don't put a transition zone, then the water is going to stop there, and you get an area of waterlogged. So if you have clay and put a berm on top, you have to make sure that the clay part of the soil is transitioned, and also that when you get below the transition zone, that the water can drain off a bit. Like Chicago Botanic Garden, it got the collection from Longwood Gardens back in the 1970s. Longwood just gave them their collection of big conifers, and they have a heavy clay soil, but they're on a slope. So what they did was they dug a large hole, and then they dug a little ditch from the hole down to a low area. And so then they put the plants in the hole, but instead of getting a bathtub effect, the water would drain down the ditch that they dug from the hole. But not everybody could do that. But the key is to get it above the clay, put the plants above it, and berming is really the only satisfactory way. They say you can improve clay soils by adding compost. Don't add sand to it. That doesn't help. That has to be compost. But you're going to have to add it probably for 10 or 20 years to get any sort of good results that are going to be semi-permanent. And even then, you're still going to have a zone right below where you worked, which is going to be clay. So if you have clay, think berms.
Cool. So I've seen in my hunts to soften my clay soil some products called liquid gypsum or humeric acid kind of solutions. Have you guys used any of those? We'll start with Bob and go to the right.
Okay, you ever hear a guy named Etzelwood, Bonsai Village
Yes.
in Oregon? Well, he was the guy who came up with the woods rooting hormone. He was a bit of a chemist. He developed a chemical that if you sprayed it on the ground, it would break up the clay. And so that might be what you're thinking of. But then he also developed another chemical that if you put it on a sandy soil, it made it hard like a clay soil. So he
Don't mix up the two.
yeah, chemicals that went both ways. But he had a chemical that would break up the clay. I guess he made more money with his chemical business than he did with his plant business. But he was quite a guy.
Oh, cool. What do you think, Ethan?
Yeah, you know, I don't have a lot of experience with the gypsum. I mean, we've used it a little bit, but I mean, none of our researchers have made trials that we could just come to any conclusions with. It's just like anything that, I mean, I've had neighbors use it where, you know, their dogs have been and try to get grass to grow again and that sort of thing. But I don't know. You know, I mean,
It's
good question whether it really helps that much. I don't know how much it helps.
it's
I have
probably
no
best to get as much
experience with it.
organic stuff as you can. I'm sorry, Ted, my bad.
I have no experience with any of those, so I don't know.
So we probably want to use as much organic stuff as you can to mix in with your clay and raise it. Seems like the easiest and most tried and true method, right?
For sure.
Um, so we're gonna have a good soil conversation, I think. Somebody was asking or mentioned doing trench the soil. I'm wondering if that means like double digging it like arborists to break up the soil, or tilling it. The chat question is, could you trench the soil like arborists do to break up the soil? I don't have any experience or knowledge of seeing that. So do you guys?
I would think we'd still be looking at the same issue over time. That clay will just settle back down. You know, each rainstorm will get the particles back where they want to be again.
Yeah, I mean, we've had arborists do vertical mulching on older trees that, so they bore holes and then they put in a mixture that includes, you know, the coarse texture, you know, coarse sand and gravel and then organic matter. And, you know, it's to improve the aeration because we have heavy soil. So I don't know whether that's what he's talking about, but trenching, I mean, the only
Yes.
trenching that I know about is if you have poor drainage, you know, you can put in trenches and drainage lines.
Yes, vertical
certainly.
mulching is what he was referring to.
Vertical mulching, okay, that's what he was referring to. Yeah, that's oftentimes used with heavy soils, and that's something that we have paid arborists to do to individual specimens that we don't want to lose because they're fan favorites.
Right. So now people are starting to ask about when they can move plants. I know we usually do it during the winter. Is there any kind of techniques or stuff that they need to do after digging up a conifer and replanting it? We'll start with Ted.
I guess my first thing is everybody's always real anxious to get going early in the spring, and I just encourage them to wait till the soil structure is workable. It's so easy to damage the soil structure with compaction by just you know, if you spend a lot of time pruning a conifer when the soil's wet, you'll compact the soil right around it. And same thing true of trying to work it out of the ground and dig it and so forth. But once the soil is in a good condition to work without compacting it, then definitely springtime's an awesome time to do that.
Anything else, Ethan or Bob? Transplanting conifers?
Well, one of the things is how long has the conifer been in the ground before they tried to move it? If it's been in the ground more than about 4 or 5 years, then they should be root pruning it at least 6 months before they try to move it.
Mhm.
Where they should go around it with a sharp spade and push down the depth of the spade. And they can trench, the books show you trenching half of it, backfill with sawdust, and then trench the other half a few months later, then backfill with sawdust. But you don't necessarily have to do it to that extent. But you have to take a shovel and push it down all the way around the plant. That'll cut surface roots and encourage it to make a lot more feeder roots. And if you're going to move it in the spring, then you want to do that the previous fall. And so it'll make roots through the fall, and then until the ground freezes, then move it in the spring. Once you've moved it, of course, the size will determine whether or not you have to stake it. And if you stake it, you got to be careful how you stake it also, because you don't want to make it too rigid. But there's a lot to moving it. But there's nothing to be afraid of. It's the trees where you don't want it, and you're going to cut it down anyway. You might as well try to move it, and if you lose it, you lose it.
Right. Ethan, you've not moved too many plants, I don't think.
Yeah, we, I met with our local Conifers Society member and nurseryman Bill Hendricks the other year, and we made up a little flyer on when to plant a tree. Because there are some trees that are best dug in the spring and not in the fall. So spring is a good time for just about everything, as Ted said, once the ground is workable. But the problem we have here with our heavy soil is, sometimes the spring is a tough time to dig. And then by the time you can dig, it's almost summer and it gets hot. So for us, one of the best times is actually in late August to September. And so because there's a lot of root growth, as Bob pointed out, that occurs that time, from that time of year right up until the ground freezes. And you tend to pay attention to a newly transplanted trees that same season. And as the season wears on and you get tired of it, you tend to get more rain later in the fall. So for us, that's a really good time to move plants, as well as in the spring, if we get conditions that are conducive, if the ground dries out enough.
Right. Cool. Thank you. So we're gonna go back to the making of berm / raised bed. How high do you think you need to go to make a difference with keeping the drainage proper? Just like 3 or 4 inches, or should you make it like a foot? Or is sort of the sky the limit? Go ahead, Ted.
I'm intrigued to hear Bob's input on that because of the work he did out there with the gardens there at the, you mentioned earlier with the layered kind of a look. I would think it'd have to be a minimum of like a foot to be really effective.
It sounds like the Conesium garden was basically built on a cement pad.
Almost. Yeah, whenever I berm, I do a mixture for my berm also. I get a here, I don't know about other parts of the country, but the Northwest, when we buy topsoil, we don't get pure topsoil. We get topsoil, 1/3 soil, 1/3 compost, and 1/3 sand made up at the supplier. And so we get that, and then we put that on for our to build a berm, and then put a layer of compost on top, make it even richer in compost, and then rototill the whole thing in. And I'd say you need at least a foot, and if you're going to be putting big trees in, you might want 2 feet, but 3 foot I think would be excessive.
It's going to shrink after a while, right? Sorry, Ethan.
Oh, no, that's fine. Yes, I mean, that's one factor, is that you don't want, like 50% organic matter, because the whole soil is going to, the volume is going to shrink down. We've made that mistake in the past. So you want to keep your organic matter not to a minimum, but don't think that the sky's the limit with that. One thing that we have tried is with a backhoe with our heavy soil to break it up just with a whole scoop of the backhoe and then have organic matter added, but not rototilled in to whole beds. And then to build on top of that. That especially works if there's somewhat of a slope. If you're in a hollow or if you're just basically on the flat, that's not going to help you too much. But we have tried that with some decent success. Because sometimes you really, and Bob talked about subsoiling, we've had subsoilers, but just having the, not to be breaking up all of the structure of the soil, but yet to add the organic matter and then add a layer on top of that to plant into. And sometimes we just plant it into just that native soil. It depends on what trees you're planting. If they're more adaptable to heavy soil, then you can just plant directly into that without a raised bed. But for most garden plants in a garden bed, you want to have a range of things that require good drainage so that you end up wanting that raised bed.
Right.
We did the subsoiling where the ground had been compacted, so it didn't have good structure. And then we had a pit run on top of it before we did the topsoil. And interesting enough, I go in there now and most of the topsoil has filtered down into the pit run from the irrigation and from the rain and everything. So you end up having the whole thing blended after a while.
And was the pit run kind of acting as that transition zone that you mentioned earlier?
One reason it was used was it was cheaper than topsoil, because we bought like 400 yards of it to build the berms in the garden, and we just wanted the drainage, but we didn't want to use pure sand, and we wanted something there that was going to last, and we knew the topsoil, the compost and everything would rot down, eventually disappear. So we subsoiled, then we put the pit run, and then put topsoil on top of it, and the topsoil on top eventually disappeared, but it's still there. Obviously, it's just blended more with the top of the pit run. So I think we have a nice transition zone there now, with the whole thing down into the clay. We have excellent drainage in there now.
Nice.
What is pit run, Bob? Is that just stone dust?
No, it's a mixture of sand and gravel. I'm not sure.
Around here, they'd call it bank run too. It just dug out of a gravel pit in our
Yeah,
local
and just
case.
washed, and they don't run it through sieves, I guess, or they're to size it. They don't sort it. It's unsorted sand and gravel, basically. So it's cheaper than getting stuff and sorted because doesn't have the labor involved. All they do is wash it and then deliver it. Has excellent drainage, but there's no nutrition, no nutrients in there, no compost, nothing like that.
Okay, cool. So has anybody ever tried when they're just planting, not in a garden bed, but in their landscape? As we all know, sometimes your plants are too deep in the pot, or B&B, you can have them too deep by like even 4 or 5 inches. Just taking the grass out of your area you're planting in and putting the root ball on top, and then filling in and making kind of like a little sloping area from the crown down to the soil level. It will, depending on what you use to backfill, you might have to add it for a couple years to keep it from sinking, but you might be able to do that too, I suppose, right? If you're not making a huge bed.
I think so, as long as for sure the soil that was on top of that root crown was removed, so that that problem was addressed first.
Okay, cool. So we had a couple questions come across about if you're gonna put conifers in a container, what's the preferred mix for that? Or combination of nutrients and ingredients?
Well, for us, I recommend to folks when they're doing that, that a pine bark base or some kind of a conifer bark, and then adding to that conventional potting soil. And the pine bark helps give some aeration and structure to it, so it doesn't become mush like the regular potting soil is wont to do.
Any,
It depends a little bit on what part of the country you're in. When I lived in Pennsylvania, I had to make one type of potting soil. When I moved to Oregon and Washington, I had to completely change the potting soil. I think a lot of it was due to the different winters. Because we get rain almost every day in the winter, like a mist, and so things are constantly wet. And we don't use any peat moss in our conifer mix, none at all, because it retains the water, and it's like the plants are growing in a little bit of a swamp through the winter. In the east, I used to use peat moss as a percentage of my mix, and so because I wanted it to retain water when I watered in the summer and such, because it's so hot. And then in the winter, the pot froze unless it was in a greenhouse or a holding house, in which case you maintain the water that way. And I don't know if the aeration was a problem or not, but I know in the winter, getting real cold, if the mix was a little bit more solid, I think the temperature changes weren't as big a complaint, but the pot would freeze and just stay frozen. Here in the Northwest, we want good air circulation. So if you look at plants you buy in big containers from the nurseries in the Northwest, some of them are potted in pure bark dust. That's all they use. And that's why when you take plants from some of these nurseries, large ones, and put them in the ground, if you don't strip the outer third of the media off of it, just plant it, it's almost impossible to keep it wet enough to survive, and the plant dies, no matter how much water you put on it, because once that bark dries, you can't get it wet again.
It's very hydrophobic once it dries out.
Yeah, and to save money, nurseries are just using bark. They're not mixing compost with their bark anymore. They used to mix compost, pumice, and bark dust or bark. And to save money, they've done away with the compost and the pumice and just use pure bark on the big stuff. And they can even go down to a gallon with it, and some nurseries have done that too. They're going just to gallon size, just using the bark. They just use a finer bark. And it's kind of funny because they can't use it in their grafting pots, because you have to put about 4 pieces of bark in it. It doesn't work. But when you handle nursery stock from the Northwest, you got to be cognizant of that fact. If you get nursery stock from the Southeast or the Northeast or the central part of the country, you don't have this stuff growing in pure bark.
Yeah, our mix is like 80% bark and then the 20% compost, and that seems to work well for us here in the Northeast.
Bob, I think someone has asked this a couple times, but not being from on the West Coast, I don't think we knew the answer. Have you any suggestions on how to grow conifers well in serpentine soil?
No.
do what we've been talking about all night and make a raised bed, right?
Yeah. Serpentine soil is in southern Oregon, in the I can't think of the name of the big mountain range down there. But those are serpentine. I think, isn't the serpentine soil a very high acid condition? And also,
I don't know if
Almost
Scotty's
no
still
organic
here.
matter.
yeah, and there are some poisonous compounds they're generated too by the weathering of the serpentine rocks. So it's pretty nasty, but I think Timber Press had a book out on serpentine soils and the plants you grow in them quite a few years ago. I don't, grown in containers, and like the Willamette Valley in Oregon is a beautiful valley with lush soil, and so actually most of us here in the West Coast do not have experience growing plants in serpentine soil. You have to go down into southern Oregon, and I'm not sure around here where you'd find it, unless up in the Cascades, maybe.
Yeah, Scotty said it was in the Klamath Mountains.
What mountains?
Klamath, it's Klamath.
Yeah, Klamath Falls. Yeah, that's not the big mountain range I'm thinking of, though.
Okay.
That's not the mountain range I'm thinking of, but yeah, I know rock gardeners are very just love serpentine soils. They get all sort of rock garden plants growing there because plants tend to be stunted.
Oh,
It's not real good conditions.
Yeah.
he also said it was also in the Sierra Nevada hills and some coast ranges. So sounds like there's a good topic for a book from Timber Press.
They have one, but probably out of print.
Yeah, you can still find all that stuff anywhere on Google, right?
Yeah.
So
Well, the rock gardeners, they sometimes they'll grow these crucifers, plants in the mustard family that can handle those situations, and there are even some that are used to remediate the toxicity of those soils. So adding some companion plants that are in that family wouldn't hurt.
cool. So since we have a bunch of fabulous growers with us tonight, about for how long can you still take cuttings? Is it getting close to the time where you would stop, or is it getting to the time where you're just now starting?
Cuttings for what? For what? I'm sorry, this is Bill. I completely forgot about this thing.
Nice of you to join us, Bill.
I know. It's like I was sitting there going, I'm like, turning on Jeopardy, and my wife goes, "Oh, don't you have your meeting?" And I'm like, "That was at 7 o'clock."
Oops. Was that on Jeopardy?
Well, I'm sorry.
Better late than
was
never.
Completely zoned out. No, for grafting, for me, I try to have everything done no later than the end of March, but that's grafting. Cuttings, at least for me, other people do it different ways, but normally I try to do those and let those go as long as I possibly can. I don't know what Ted probably has a different process. Everybody seems to have a different process.
I often say that you can ask 10 different propagators the same question, you get 10 different answers, and all 10 will be right. It just, they're totally different.
It's whatever works for you. I mean, I like to do my grafts, my conifer grafts earlier in the year. And then cuttings I'll do, like late in the year, like towards the end of the year, December, January, I like to do those. Grafts, I'll do grafts up until like I said, the end of March. It's getting a little iffy that late, but usually by the end of February, but I'll do them up to the end of March if I have, especially if it's deciduous stuff. I kind of try to do that last, but conifers I try to do a little bit earlier. But everybody, like Ted said, everybody's got a different process.
Cool. So Jock has informed me that you have some good experience working with heavy clay soils and making some raised beds. That's kind of been our topic of the night. What is your technique for creating raised beds and dealing with heavy clay soil? Yeah.
It's challenging. Actually,
You don't want to give up your secret?
Well, I generally put most of my stuff in raised beds, and I try to put some organics in there. Biggest thing I find is get the soils worked up. So I'll take a clay soil and I'll till it. I'll get a plow and I don't know if you've ever heard of a subsoiler, but a subsoiler it's got a big finger. Oh, just my camera, here it is. Got a big finger like this, and it kind of comes in and you drag it along, and it really gets down deep. And I usually use that and try to break up the soil and then get leaves or something if I can get something. My beds, though, I've been working on my beds for 25 plus years, so I don't create any new beds, so I don't have quite so much to deal with. But when I till up, or if I'm planting say a tree, I make a really big hole. And like the grass that's in there, a lot of times people just take and scalp the grass off the top and discard that. I don't do that. I chop it up and put it back in the mix in the soil and it gives me a little bit of organics in there, and then plant it and try to mound everything up a little bit. Biggest problem with clay soils is they don't drain well. So if you don't mound stuff up a little bit, what happens is the water kind of gets down in there and makes the tree can't breathe. So you got to get stuff up a little bit. And most of my beds have been there long enough, though, that the trees are breaking. The roots are getting in there, breaking things up. I had some mounds I got. I don't know if you've ever heard of muck soil. It's basically sort of just loam. It's just straight loam. It's real black. A friend of mine put a pond in and had a lot of that in there, and I put a whole bed in with that stuff, and it was probably 3 foot tall, and that was, wow, a long time ago, probably 15 years ago. And that bed, the worms have been getting in there for years and years and years, because the worms kind of crawl up in there and then drag it back down and crawl up in, drag it back down. And that mound is maybe a foot tall now, if that tall. They just pulled so much of it down there. I just try to get some organics and just work it up. Put mulch on. Once I mulch it, I try not to disturb that soil again.
Cool, thank you. Great tips. Is there any suggestions for preventing winter burn on conifers, in particular Chief Joseph, in a container?
Put it in someplace out of the wind.
I'm
Also,
not.
also get ones that are grafted on Pinus contorta latifolia. When they're grafted on sylvesters, they tend to burn.
But not necessarily do our nurseries tell us that, do they?
No, but the guy who found the original, he only ever put them on latifolia.
Okay.
That's all I put them on too. And
Latifolia, I've never grafted on latifolia. I've grafted them on contorta. I have grafted on straight contorta.
yeah, but which subspecies? Because Pinus contorta is also shore pine, which is not hardy.
Oh, well, it's not.
Latifolia is lodgepole.
Okay, it must be the lodgepole then, because
Yeah,
I'm grafted, so I'm grafting them up. But yeah, Scots, they don't like it.
Yeah. Latifolia is a contorta is a good universal understock for 2 and 3 needle pine. I like it better than Scotch. I like it better than Niagara.
Okay, I got a question for you. So would it work? How's it work on Ponderosa?
Fine.
Really?
Yeah, work on any of those. It's almost a universal pine understock. I wouldn't use it on 5 needle. But I would suspect that 5 needle might take as good on that as they do on some Burgii. But I never had good luck on some Burgii, so I wouldn't.
Yeah, I've never had luck on that. But I mean, that's good to know. I mean, I've got a few contortas out here. I was actually thinking about what was I going to do with them. That's actually kind of cool to know. I've got a Ponderosa out here I'd like to graft, but I didn't have anything to put on because I don't like Scots, and they say put on white, but
No, put it on contorta. That's what I always did it on.
really?
Yeah.
Well, that's amazing. Thank you.
Even the experts learning something tonight.
Hey, Ted, get that? You know what to do now?
Yeah, I got it.
It's interesting. Pinus nigra is universal, or not kind of universal, like the Scotch, but Lane Ziegenfuss taught me how to graft years ago, and he always put his Conifer geniana on Niagara. He never put it on Scotch. He felt it always took better on Niagara. So you have a little bit of compatibility issues there that you wouldn't expect to have. And Pinus contorta works for all that stuff. And I think Banksiana, same thing. I think Banksiana is pretty much universal also.
Yeah, Banksiana is pretty easy to graft on Scots too.
Mhm.
Cool. So if you end up having the wrong rootstock, do you think wilt-proof or donor oil spray will help with the burn by protecting the needles from the wind?
Where are we talking about? I mean, where?
I'm not sure. Anoka, what part of the country do you live in?
I wouldn't think the oil would work.
I don't think it'd work. I think the oil would probably make it worse because that's going to take your wax off your needles.
Yeah.
Reno, Nevada?
Yeah. That's hot and dry.
Yeah, that's hot and dry. That's
So the
mean, you
wilt-proof is wax. That might help some, right?
yeah, wilt-proof might help because it actually adds a little bit of wax to it. Most of the needles, it's like if you take a blue spruce and you put neem oil or insecticidal soap or something like that, basically they'll turn green. The reason they're turning green is because you're washing the wax off. So, and a lot of times your blue conifers are blue because they have an extra coating of wax. That wax is dark or thicker on there as a rule, and it makes them blue. Like if you look at your most of your conifers, if they're blue, they're generally a little hardier. Yeah, if you don't want to wash that wax off there, that's what actually keeps them from desiccating and drying out.
I think the winter sun does as much as anything. For
Yeah.
tipping, more
Yeah.
so.
Yeah, that's actually winter sun's real bad. Winter sun, I struggle with Chamaecyparis obtusa here because they can't take the winter sun. And it's not so much the sun that bothers them. What happens is you get like a warm day in February or March and maybe a week and the temperatures will go into 50s and 60s and Chamaecyparis start pushing a little bit of sap up in there, and then you get a day, another week, all of a sudden it's down in the 20s again. Well, they freeze because the sap's up in there and they freeze, and that causes most of my damage. So most of the time, if you can put them in winter shade, they're going to do better. The summer that it's like I put a lot of stuff on my property on the north side if it's delicate like that. And they do much better. As long as they stay cold. If they warm up and the sap starts flowing, and then you get cold or you get some really bad winds, yeah, you're gonna have problems.
Yeah, a lot of the winter golds are due to temperature, not sun.
Yeah,
So if Chief Joseph, put it somewhere, maybe gets an hour or two of sun a day, it probably won't. It may not get the brown tips. I noticed the thing on brown tips on Scott's understock in Oregon, visiting some nurseries down there. They had Chief Joseph and they'd almost completely defoliate in the winter. The needle would just turn brown for half their length. And even putting them in shade, they still get a lot of the brown. But I was grafting them on latifolia and I didn't have that problem. And the fellow found a name escapes me at the moment. He never had any problem with tip browning either. But he was putting my latifolia. I think she probably have one done on Scott's spine because that's what most nurseries use.
yeah. I stopped using Scott's on contorta a long time ago. I almost always have contorta out here, so I've got some. I know what I can do with them.
Cool. So Kelly asks if you have non-ideal soil. So I'm going to assume that means clay, but I guess it could also mean sand. So this could be a multi-part question. Which evergreens do you think, or I guess species, do you think would do best? We'll go with heavy clay soil first. I know we talked about thujas at one point.
Yeah, they're pretty resilient. They'll take a lot of abuse. Most of the things will try. Firs are ones that really struggle with this heavy soils. I mean, the rest of the stuff will. I mean, I've seen white pines out here. Most of the stuff will do okay, but yeah, firs don't like heavy soils like that, especially if they're sitting in a bowl. I mean, if that drainage has come down, if you can get them up high, they do better. But they don't like heavy soils.
So Ethan, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, in addition to the arborvitaes, which do really well in it,
I'm surprised that, well, we have some cryptomerias that are hardy this far north, and those do pretty well in our heavy soils. And I noticed, of course, they do pretty well in the south. And we got lots of clay there, so those are very adaptable to heavy soils. Some of the, I mean, obviously, bald cypress.
Oh, yeah.
Because it
They'll
doesn't
take-
require much in the way of aeration. So bald cypress is great. Dawn redwood isn't quite as, adaptable, but dawn redwood does just fine in our heavy soils. Of course, now I'm getting into the deciduous conifers, like even the tamarack, our native larch does well in our heavy soil. Some of the spruces do pretty darn well.
Norways, Serbians do pretty good.
Yeah, even Norway spruce gets to be a really good. There's a reason there are a lot of Norway spruce around. They're adaptable.
Well, what do you guys think about Pinus sylvestris? I know it does really well for us here, and we're definitely heavy clay.
They got other problems
Yes.
that make
I
them
was gonna
less-
say, I'm glad they do well somewhere.
Yeah, I mean they do okay. I had one that I got a long time ago when I first moved in my property, and I put it up on the hill, and it did great for years. It's probably about 18-inch diameter trunk, and I went out there in the spring, and it was dead. So, and I think it got a beetle or something, so a pine borer or something. I'm not sure exactly what got it, but something just killed it. And I mean, it was alive this year and dead the following year. And that's that's the way they do it. They get a certain size around here, and they just something kills them. They're a little temperamental.
So we're going to go to the opposite spectrum. I've had this question asked of me from people that live on the East Coast and near several lakes. What do you guys do for sandy soil? What will grow in sandy soil? I know Ted probably has a lot of that with the people asking about the Great Lakes, because along the edges there, they have a lot of sand. So any suggestions for sandy soil, Ted?
Oh, the junipers do well. The spruce again, they're just so versatile.
Mhm.
Definitely would go with them. Those are probably my first two that I talk to people about, depending on how much sand is in the soil. Some of the pines too.
Cool. What do you
Up
think,
along
Ethan?
Lake Erie, where like not far from where Ethan's at, where what's his name? Horace Wilson's old place, Ethan.
Yeah.
His place was all sand. It was sand. He couldn't hardly dig a tree, because what you'd have to actually get a mechanical scoop it and drop the whole thing in the basket, because you couldn't dig it because there was no structure of the bulk, because it just fall apart. He grew everything there and did really good.
Yeah.
They'll like it.
It's a lot easier to grow in sand.
Yeah.
I mean, Tim Brotzman, he bare rooted a
yeah.
lot of things.
Yeah.
Because it's so that's you can grow a lot of conifers in sand.
Mhm. Yeah,
But of
especially
course,
sandy
Tim,
loam.
yeah, but Tim had sort of where he lives, you get down far enough and you get into the water table. And so you had the ideal, the water wicking up through the sand. So, yeah, but if you have sand and you don't have a water table that's anywhere near the surface, then yeah, you've got other problems. You need really drought tolerant, cypresses and junipers and it's just more plants that will come through those drought years.
Yeah, the droughts would be a problem for sure, but I mean, they do seem to do pretty good. I know the stuff that Horace had up there and is Bill's place up there, Bill Hendrick's place, is that sandy up there?
No, his nursery is basically, I mean, his house is on the sandy side of the road, but
Yeah.
the nursery is not. So, no.
Well, he doesn't really have that much in the ground either.
There's Gerard, they were on the old sand road.
Yeah, they were
You
sand.
can, and I mean, the roots will continue to grow down. I mean, they have no problem doing that with the good aeration. Yeah, you got the sandy soil. So there's not that much problem growing conifers in sand from my experience.
So if you're looking for new property, find sand and not clay.
My wife and I said, when we moved over 10 years ago, we said we will not move any place that doesn't have sandy loam.
Well, I think you can go to the US, isn't there a government agency that has soil maps that you can see and stuff? Is that the extension agency or?
No, it's what used to be Soil Conservation Service. Now it's Natural Resource Conservation Service, and each county has an office, or sometimes some counties will share the office, and they have soil maps there.
So if you're looking for property, go to the natural resources.
Natural Resource Conservation Service. It's usually at a USDA service center in the county.
Okay, cool. Do your homework first.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have.
That adds more complication buying a house.
Hey, after dealing with the clay and the rocks that we have here, I wish I had gone to one and looked first.
When I bought my farm here, we overlaid the soil map with the zone map. And I said, I want to be zone 6 and I want sandy loam. And it narrowed it down to just a very few spots in a couple of counties here. And that's what we ended up shopping for.
Yeah, it's good advice if you're definitely big into gardening, right?
Yeah.
If that's what you're gonna do. We have time for one more question in chat if anybody has anything. Otherwise, I know it's springtime and we're all itching to get outside. Is there a certain telltale something blooming or anything before you start pruning? Or can you just start pruning as when the soil dries out? Is there any advice for that?
I don't
Get out
prune a
there.
whole lot because conifers can bleed sap. I mean, I've seen a lot of people pruning their spruces and then you get these pitched, cascading down the trunks of the trees, and it's not the best time of year. I mean, if you absolutely have to, sure, and also, well, I already said here it tends to be wet, and so I don't want to be tromping around on my plant's roots this time of year right through early spring when it's a swamp.
I don't prune my conifers pretty much at all. So there's just no reason to. I want to see, I mean, there's selections. I mean, if you got to prune them, then it doesn't matter what you put in, because anything you make pretty decent if you prune it all the time, or shear it all the time. But I don't. Apple trees, that's about all I ever prune.
Oh, I prune dwarf conifers. I mean, Bob
Yeah,
Fincham,
but you're a weirdo.
told me, no, open up holes so it can get inside. And
Yeah, I do. Yeah,
those
yeah,
needles.
super
Yeah,
tight
sure.
stuff. Yeah, the real
Absolutely.
tight stuff, you got to open it up a little bit, because otherwise the old needles get in there. And yeah, but I don't do that in the spring or the summer. I do that late summer, fall.
Yes.
So
Exactly.
other than yews, which you pretty much have to prune several times a year if you want them to be really shapely, you'd prune most conifers that are going to be rather pitchy in the fall.
Yeah, most stuff starts going dormant in like August. When it gets really, really hot, they start going dormant. They slow down. They're not growing as much. They don't have as much sap. So late summer, fall, you can do it usually because they're not real sappy then. Spring, yeah, like white pines I mean, right now I'm working on some of my grafting and they just drip sap.
Right. I know most of the yews I've trimmed, I do them in the spring after they've flushed out, and then again in the fall, keep them looking pretty through the winter. Is that pretty much the one of the few things you'd prune in the spring, early summer?
And you do it early spring for yews. I mean, if you wait till after the growth is flushed, you really hurt the plant.
No.
We had at the Cleveland Botanical Garden, which we acquired back, oh gosh, it's 8 years ago. We had a new lady from England, and she wanted to redo the topiary garden, which had a lot of yews, and she wanted to cut them way back. And I said, well, you can do it early, and but once it flushes, you're gonna lose plants, and so.
So we're gonna last question on pruning. Would you prune Cephalotaxis early in the spring? Would that be okay? Bob, what do you think?
A lot of conifers, I always felt you prune them anytime you want. When you have the time. Pines, I prune when the candles are elongated.
I do candling, yeah.
Yeah, I take a machete out, a long machete, and I just swing that thing around. It depends on what I'm pruning, why I'm pruning. I've never done a lot of pruning on my conifers because when I had my nursery, I wanted things to grow normal, and I would photograph them and such because I wanted to show how the actual growth habits were. Like if you go to Isley Nursery to John's Memorial Garden, there all that stuff is shaped, and so I don't even go there to take pictures anymore for my books or anything because it doesn't show the normal growth habit of a lot of those things. The only pruning I used to do was when I went out to take signwood for grafting, I cut holes in any of my dwarfs. Any of the real tight ones, I just fill them with holes. And then in spring, they'd pop out the new growth and just fill right in. So if you don't want to look at the cut ends through the whole winter, then what I would do is right before the new growth starts, I would prune. Pushing sap doesn't hurt anything. I've cut grapevines that I could almost put a bucket out and catch a bucket of sap coming out of the grapevine, so I pruned them late. The same thing with maples. You prune them late, you're going to get a lot of sap, but it's not going to hurt the plant. Might be a little bit unsightly depending upon what it is. But Cephalotaxis and taxes, I would prune them once in the spring, and then maybe again middle of summer if they were pushing some growth where I didn't want it. Anybody at the top area, I think, is out there pruning several times a year on them anyway. And it'll kind of shaggy when the new growth pushes. So they go out and they prune a lot of that off with the hedge trimmers. But it depends what you're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, you get Christmas tree farms, they shear those trees all summer long.
Yep. With long swords.
They have great big long knives like he's talking about, machetes, and they just
And they wear leather chaps.
yeah, and wear leather chaps so they don't cut their legs off.
Yeah. I've heard of that happening at a couple growers out here. The guy would whack himself in the leg with a long machete and end up with 100 stitches.
Yep. Oh, watch him do it sometime. It's scary, buddy.
Yeah.
Well, that's awesome. Not that he cut his leg off, but I think there's some Instagram videos out there of people doing that are like ninja warriors. It's insane what they do with those long machetes. Well, thank you all for coming and answering all the questions, and thank you to everybody that came to listen and participate. We're going to do another one in March for sure. And then we might have to change the time in April since we're all going to be outside and it starts to get dark a little bit later. So we're definitely on for March. Don't forget, as part of the registration gifts for this upcoming meeting, Bartlett has put together all their technical reports for us in a book, and everybody that registers is going to get a copy of that. So it talks about diseases and pests and planting techniques and pruning techniques and all sorts of little tidbits of information on growing conifers. So it's a great resource that we're going to be getting for attending the meeting in Charlotte at the end of April. And our garden that we're going to be spending most of the time at is the Bartlett Tree Research and Arboretum. They have more than just conifers there. They have a world-renowned collection of ilex and rhododendrons and magnolias. So you'll be able to see an awful lot of interesting plant material there. So I'm going to, hopefully we'll see you all there. I'm going to stop the recording and we can stay and chat for a few minutes, or we'll see everybody